Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah. Those of you who listen regularly to this show know the foundations of this podcast, but for those of you who are new here, I want you to know that this show serves a dual purpose. First, it provides a safe space for victims and survivors of rape or sexual assault to share their experiences to facilitate healing. Secondly, it educates listeners on the principles of a trauma-informed response, going beyond superficial understanding to foster effective advocacy and positive action. This is episode 141, and this week I don't have a guest, but I want to talk to you about a phrase I use often, but that may be confusing or even controversial to some of you. This episode is my take on rape culture, what it is and how it impacts our communities, society as a whole, and obviously our culture. Again, rape culture. I've said the words, but let's break it down. The issue of rape and sexual assault and how society responds to victims remains one of the most pressing and contentious problems in American culture. Many survivors of rape or sexual assault face disbelief, judgment, and even outright blame when they come forward with their experiences. You've heard that from many of the guests that I've had on this show. This is a pervasive phenomenon where victims are doubted or blamed for their own trauma, and it's deeply rooted in societal beliefs, cultural norms, and institutional shortcomings. It is critical to understand the psychological, social, and institutional forces that perpetuate this problem in order to create a meaningful change. Let me begin by first defining what I mean when I refer to rape culture. In my characterization of rape culture, it's a societal environment in which sexual violence is normalized, excused, or even trivialized. What this culture promotes is attitudes, behaviors, and systems that enable rape and sexual assault to be viewed as a non-serious misunderstanding between people, or, commonly, as a result of the victim's actions. You've heard it. Things like, what was she wearing? How much had she had to drink? Why was she being so flirtatious? And on and on. Notice that most of these accusatory comments are made against women victims, but that's not always the case. These same victim-blaming comments and questions are raised against all victims, including non-binary. And rape culture manifests in numerous ways, from the way media portrays sexual violence to the everyday conversations that perpetuate harmful myths about rape. This includes this even includes the approach that many law enforcement officials inappropriately handle sex assault and rape reports, and the way that prosecutors commonly scorn these cases in the rare instances that the investigation actually leads to charges being filed against predators. The most common approach from the criminal justice system is to dispose of these cases in the fastest and easiest way possible. This cultural framework plays a significant role in why many people in the U.S. continue to disbelieve victims or even blame them for their assault. Let me sum this up for you. The central aspect of rape culture is victim blaming, where survivors are held responsible for the assault they endured. The approach serves to shift the blame away from the perpetrator and focus it on the victim, subtly suggesting that the assault was in some way the survivor's fault. The normalization of rape culture is also evident in how sexual violence is often portrayed in popular culture, including movies, television, and music. These portrayals frequently depict rape or sexual assault as a misunderstanding, a mere consequence of alcohol or flirtation, or even as a form of justice or retaliation. Such representations diminish the severity of the sexual violence and reduce the empathy for victims by reinforcing false narratives about consent and the true nature of sexual assault. The skepticism surrounding rape victims is multifaceted and is influenced by both cultural and psychological factors. One of the most significant reasons that many people do not believe rape victims is the pervasive myth of false accusations. Research consistently shows that false reports of sexual assault are extremely rare, with estimates suggesting that they occur in only 2 to 8% of cases. The problem, though, is that the myth that most accusations are fabricated persists in public consciousness, largely because of high-profile cases of false accusations that are heavily publicized, while the much larger number of true reports often goes unnoticed or unreported. The widespread skepticism about rape victims is further fueled by deeply ingrained societal beliefs about gender and power dynamics. Historically, women have been socialized to accept certain roles, including the idea that they should be submissive and passive in their relationships. These roles often come with a double standard where women are expected to conform to societal expectations of purity and modesty. When a woman reports rape, her actions leading up to the incident are often scrutinized, and she's questioned about whether or not she was asking for it. The victim's behavior, appearance, or past relationships may be used to justify the assault, while the perpetrator is given the benefit of the doubt. This is a result of the deeply embedded societal narrative that women are often the investigators or co-conspirators in sexual violence, even when they're the victims. Additionally, some people may struggle to believe survivors because they cannot fathom that such a crime could happen in their own lives or in their community. The trauma of rape is often so intense that it challenges their worldview, making them reluctant to accept the reality of the crime. They may downplay the incident or refuse to believe the victim as a way of protecting themselves from confronting the possibility that such a horrific, violent act could happen to someone they know or love. The way social institutions, such as law enforcement, healthcare providers, and the legal system, respond to rape survivors has a profound impact on whether or not victims are believed. Law enforcement plays a critical role in the criminal justice process, yet many survivors report that their initial interactions with police officers are often dismissive or re-traumatizing. Police officers may not be trained in trauma-informed approaches. Most police officers aren't trained in trauma-informed approaches, leading them to make assumptions about the victim's credibility or to treat survivors insensitively. For example, as I've mentioned before, police may ask invasive and judgmental questions that suggest the victim is at fault, such as, "Why didn't you fight back?" or "What were you wearing?" These questions not only re-traumatize victims, but also cast doubt on their accounts. This skepticism is exacerbated by the presumption that a woman who is intoxicated or dressed in a certain way is inviting assault. Law enforcement officers may be unprepared to deal with the emotional and psychological aftermath of rape, resulting in insensitive questioning, delayed investigations, or mishandling of evidence. Such failures discourage victims from coming forward and leave them feeling unsupported or invalidated by the system that is supposed to be protecting them. Additionally, the judicial system itself can be a barrier to justice. Victims may face a court system that is slow, ineffective, or, most commonly, outright biased. Trials are often focused on the victim's behavior or credibility rather than the actions of the accused perpetrator. Victims may be forced to recount their trauma in excruciating detail, often being subjected to humiliating cross-examination that undermines their testimony and their dignity. In many cases, perpetrators are not held accountable for their actions, perpetuating the sense that rape victims are not taken seriously or that the justice system does not prioritize their safety and well-being. The challenge of changing rape culture and improving societal responses to sexual violence is monumental, but it's not insurmountable. It requires collective effort from individuals, communities, and institutions to ensure that survivors of sexual violence are not only believed, but also given the care and support they need to heal. Let me give you some of the key strategies to begin dismantling rape culture. First and foremost, it's education and awareness. It's the platform that this podcast is based on, and it's a crucial step in changing societal attitudes. Schools, universities, and workplaces need to start providing comprehensive education on consent, healthy relationships, and the realities of sexual violence. Comprehensive sex education programs should go beyond abstinence-based messaging to include lessons on recognizing and respecting boundaries, understanding the nuances of consent, and debunking myths about sexual violence. Educating individuals about the impact of trauma and the psychological effects of sexual assault will actually help foster empathy and understanding for survivors. In addition, the media should be encouraged to portray a more accurate and respectful representation of sexual assault. By sharing survivors' stories in a way that respects their dignity and humanity, media can actually help create a culture of belief and support for victims. Reducing sensationalism and sensational narratives surrounding sexual violence would go a long way in deconstructing harmful myths and shifting public perceptions. Next, there needs to be both legal and policy reform. There's an urgent need for reform in the legal and criminal justice systems to ensure that survivors are treated with dignity and respect. Law enforcement agencies have to start implementing training on trauma-informed interviewing and investigation practices that ensure that victims are not further traumatized when they report their assault. Additionally, forensic exams and evidence collection has to be handled in a manner that respects the privacy and emotional well-being of survivors. I think most importantly, the judicial system must ensure that sexual assault cases are treated with the seriousness they deserve. Laws should be reformed to reduce the focus on the survivor's behavior and appearance and instead center on the actions of the perpetrator. Prosecutors and judges need to be trained to recognize the patterns of trauma experienced by survivors and to handle cases with sensitivity and empathy. Last but certainly not least is community support and advocacy. Communities have to become active participants in supporting survivors. This means creating safe spaces where victims can speak out without fear of judgment or retaliation. It involves fostering a collective sense of responsibility and ensuring that survivors receive the resources, care, and empathy that they need to heal. Advocates can play a crucial role in providing survivors with the tools they need to navigate the emotional, legal, and financial challenges they face after an assault. This can include providing legal counsel, counseling service, and peer support networks. It's what I've always said on this podcast. The journey toward dismantling rape culture and creating a society that truly supports survivors of sexual violence is a long and difficult one. But through collective efforts, educating future generations, reforming institutions, changing media narratives, and fostering community-based support, we can begin to shift the cultural attitudes that perpetuate disbelief and victim blaming. By standing together, we can create a safer and more just society and normalize the conversation, where survivors of rape and sexual assault are believed, supported, and treated with the respect they deserve. Here's something else you've heard me say a lot. Start by believing. Because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.